will be following this tutorial step by step with a few of my own tweaks to see if it actually works. Even though I have never made a tote bag before, I wanted this present to be special because my sister's-in-law birthday is coming up and I love making my own gifts. So stick with me to the very end to see if I had any issues following the tutorial, what I changed from it, and most importantly, the final result. I was lucky because the creator of the tutorial shared the exact dimensions of the pattern. If you would like to try this for yourself, I have the link of the video in my description so you can get all the details from the source. Let's begin with what for me, it's the most difficult part, cutting. Which it's basically prepping. Without this step, nothing would work. Which is exactly my problem. You see, you can cut anything you want, but without precision, you will just ruin your piece of fabric. Cutting in a straight line will be one of my first challenges following this tutorial. So let's see how she did it.
My pattern for this bag, this is the pattern. It is 17 inches wide by 15 inches tall.
So she made a 17 by 15 inches cut, and remember, we have to do this twice, the front and the back. But you can already see why I dread this part of the process so much. I am double, triple, quadruple checking that not only my fabric is straight, but so is my ruler. Because if one of them is off, I could ruin the only bit of fabric I have. Which is why I can confidently say this is what took me the longest time in the entire process. I usually use scissors to cut the fabric, but it always comes out a little jagged. So here I am using for the very first time a fabric cutter. This honestly made cutting fabric so much easier and way less intimidating. Overall, I rate this 2 out of 5.
And then I cut out 1.5 inch sections on the corners, and then the pocket is placed in the center. It's 4 inches down from the top.
I didn't even cut everything right away because it was too much, and I was excited to go to the next step, quilting.
First step in sewing your quilted tote bag is to actually quilt the outside fabric of your bag to your quilt lining.
Although this was my very first time quilting fabric, this step became my favorite because it made the project look like it was really coming together. The softness and texture were a huge game changer. However, I did have to sew a lot of lines and trace them myself. Apparently there is an attachment that helps, but I don't have one of those. I rate this a 4 out of 5 only because of how long it took me to trace and sew every single line. In case you haven't noticed, this video is full of firsts for me. I am completely new to sewing, so I have never used a fabric cutter or quilted fabric before. I didn't even know there was a technique called applique until now. Applique is one of the custom touches I added that the original tutorial didn't include. Since this is a birthday gift, I wanted to give it more personality. I decided to applique the initial of my sister-in-law's name onto the front packet. If you're like me and don't know anything about this technique, basically you lay a piece of fabric over the packet, stitch the outline of the letter, trim away the excess, and then sew around it again to create a thicker border. There's probably a special footer for this as well, but I don't have it, so I will just try my best. At first, I thought it wouldn't look great since I had limited fabric and felt like this shade of green wasn't it. But it didn't turn out so bad. In fact, it turned out better than I expected, and I feel pretty proud because I made this myself. It took me a long time, yes, but I made this. I am not done adding extra stuff to this bag, and we're not leaving the back of the packet like this. This needs a girly lining. So I took a scrap of satin I had laying around and added it to this one. All of this was a personal touch I added, so I will not be rating this step. Following the pattern from the tutorial, I pinned the packet in place. After assembling everything like this, the project finally started to feel real. Today has already been a lot for my beginner heart, so I am calling it a day and will continue tomorrow. It started raining so heavily, which made it the coziest day to finish my bag. Yesterday, I was feeling a little burnout from all the new things I was learning, quilting, applique, and the whole bag making process. Not to mention, it was my first time trying all these techniques.
And fold the raw edges in 1/2 inch and press them. I did that off camera. Then I'm going to center that on one of the sides of my lining, pin it into place, and then sew that down.
If I'm being honest, I was this close to not adding a pocket inside because of the limited amount of fabric I had, but I was able to somehow find some more fabric from the pack I bought.
And then we are going to pin the sides and pin the bottom just like we did on the outside of our bag.
This step was pretty straightforward. All we had to do was sew the ends the same way that we did on the outside. Now let's move on to boxing those corners.
Close. These are called boxed corners because when we pull our corners apart and match up those side and bottom seams and then sew straight across that corner that was cut, it's going to create a boxy bottom.
Boxing corners wasn't something I was very familiar with. It was pretty easy to follow and it gave the bag a nice shape.
These are what your straps are going to look like after you have pressed and folded them, and now we are going to sew that open pinned edge together.
For the straps, I used the same pink satin fabric as before. I quilted them because once you start carrying things, some bags can really dig into your shoulders. Especially for my sister-in-law, she is in college and I imagine she would put notebooks, books in it, and all of that would add on to the weight. And I wanted these straps to be as soft as possible. At this point, I just wanted to finish the project, but not because I was tired or burnt out, but because I was excited to see it through.
Place those pieces right sides together to sew our side seams and our bottom seams. We're just going to pin those layers together and we're going to sew it on a 5/8 inch seam allowance.
I had to sew 2 quilted parts at the same time, which made me think it would be a little too thick for my machine to handle. But I think I was worrying for nothing. At least that's what I thought before this happened. I've owned this sewing machine for over a year now, but most of the time I just kept telling myself I'd start a project next week, and that became the next week and the next week, and that they never seemed to come. I catch myself postponing the things I really want to do all the time, but if it's something I truly love, shouldn't I jump right away to do it? Or am I waiting for a special occasion? Not too long ago, I realized that doing the things you love is the special occasion. After all, there is nothing more rewarding than keeping a promise to yourself. And just look how this turned up. I cannot believe it's coming out this good. I can say that I made this myself. Up next, we're going to put everything together in what I called the assembly step.
We're going to continue pinning all around the opening of our bag, sandwiching our straps in between our lining fabric and the outside of our bag.
This is our very last step, and she put everything together to sew it in place. I would be lying if I told you that I wasn't a little nervous about this part. I feel like this step was very delicate for me because I had to sew everything I've been making at the same time, and there was so much room for mistakes. Anything could have moved and would have ruined the whole thing, and I would have to start over. That's why I rate this step a 3 out of 5. Everything is done. Now let me present to you the final result. I am lost of words when it comes to how it finally turned out. Whenever I make things myself, I feel like you can tell. But this feels like it could come out of Pinterest or at a store. Following this tutorial led me to this beautiful bag that I will be gifting to a loved one. In hindsight, I think there was a lot of steps I could have done better. I could have sewn a lot of parts with a different approach, and they could have turned out a lot better than they did. But remember when I said, even though I have never made a tote bag before, that was my little disclaimer for any mistakes I made throughout this video. So without further ado, let's take a look at everything we did to get here. We cut the fabric, made it softer by quilting, added straps, and finally assembled everything, giving us a total of 3 out of 5 stars. This score is only a representation of my skills against the steps that we saw in the tutorial. It goes without saying that I definitely recommend that you follow this tutorial, because if it could help a beginner like me, then it could definitely help you. So once again, if you would like to try for yourself, remember you can find the link of the tutorial just followed on my description.